The world just witnessed something no one thought possible. A silent earthquake. Not from nature, but from nations. For decades, Africa was written off by the same powers that plundered its wealth. They called it a land of poverty, of crisis, of dependence. But in 2025, the narrative changed forever. Across the deserts of Niger, the ports of Kenya, and the skyscrapers of Johannesburg, a quiet revolution is reshaping global power, and this time, the West isn't in control. Something extraordinary has happened. 55 nations, once divided by colonial borders, are moving as one. A continent that was treated as the world's supplier is now becoming its center of gravity. And the shockwaves? They're being felt in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, and across every Western capital that once dictated the rules of global trade. This isn't just a political headline. This is the end of an era. For more than 100 years, the West thrived on Africa's gold, oil, cobalt, and lithium, resources extracted cheap and resold at unimaginable profit. Every skyscraper in New York, every luxury district in Paris, every financial hub in London, all built on the sweat, soil, and sacrifice of the African continent. But now, that system is collapsing. Africa has united under a new vision, a $10 trillion alliance built not on dependency, but on power. It's called the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and together with BRICS, it's rewriting the rules of the global economy. In this new order, trade no longer flows through the dollar. It flows through Africa's own payment systems, currencies, and partnerships. And for the first time ever, the world's most resource-rich continent is setting the prices, not taking them. Imagine a future where African oil no longer sells in U.S. dollars, where Congolese cobalt feeds African factories, not European ones, where Nigeria's refineries power its own economy, not foreign monopolies. That future isn't decades away. It's happening right now, and it's sending Wall Street into chaos. Because when you take away Africa's dependence, you take away the West's leverage. When you replace the IMF with African-led banks, when you replace French control with African innovation, when you replace Washington's dictates with African unity, you shatter the balance of power that's held for centuries. That's why you're hearing words like panic in global policy circles. That's why Western leaders are holding emergency meetings behind closed doors. Because this alliance, this African awakening, is rewiring the global economy in real time. Just look at the numbers. A $10 trillion combined GDP, over 1.4 billion people, the world's youngest, fastest growing population, more than half of the world's critical minerals, and a digital economy growing faster than anywhere on Earth. While Europe faces recession and America fights inflation, Africa is building the foundations of the next global superpower. In Kenya, solar cities are powering industries that rival Silicon Valley. In Egypt, infrastructure megaprojects are connecting trade routes that rival the Suez Canal. In Ghana and Nigeria, fintech startups are attracting billions in global investment, reshaping finance for an entire generation. It's not just growth, it's transformation. Africa isn't waiting to be helped anymore. It's taking back control. And the reaction from the West? Panic, fear, desperation. Because the same nations that once dictated Africa's fate are watching their influence slip away, dollar by dollar, deal by deal. For the first time, Africa is negotiating from a position of strength. Not begging for aid, but commanding respect. Not borrowing from the IMF, but investing in itself. Not following global orders, but leading them. And as this alliance expands, connecting with BRICS, building its own currency systems, and uniting its markets, the global balance of power is turning southward. Analysts are calling it the Great Decoupling. The moment the world stopped orbiting around the West and began rotating around Africa, Asia, and the global South. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. This isn't just economics. This is history catching up. For centuries, Africa's wealth built the empires that colonized it. Now, the cycle has reversed. The wealth is coming home. Gold that once filled European vaults is being refined in Africa. Oil once traded in London is now processed in Lagos. Cobalt once shipped to China is now staying to fuel African electric vehicle factories. And as Africa moves from raw exports to manufacturing, from debt to investment, from division to unity, the world's financial systems are scrambling to keep up. Because when 1.4 billion people decide to trade in their own currency, when they decide to produce their own energy, their own food, their own technology, it doesn't just change Africa. It changes everything. The US dollar's dominance weakens. The IMF loses control. Europe's energy dependence deepens. And suddenly, the nations that once called the shots are being forced to adapt or fade. Africa is not rising quietly anymore. It's rising loudly, confidently, unapologetically. Every summit, every alliance, every handshake between African nations is a declaration to the world. We will no longer be the engine for someone else's prosperity. We will build our own. And that's the part that terrifies the old powers the most. Because they know that once Africa completes this transformation, there's no turning back. The future of global trade won't be decided in Washington or Paris. It'll be decided in Addis Ababa, in Nairobi, in Lagos. The future of global finance won't flow through Wall Street. It'll flow through the Pan-African payment system, a network built by Africans, for Africans. The future of energy, manufacturing, and innovation won't come from aging economies in decline. It'll come from a continent bursting with youth, ambition, and opportunity. That's why the world is watching Africa right now, not with pity, but with awe. Because something is happening that no superpower can stop. The winds of change are blowing from the Sahara to the Cape. A new dawn is breaking over 1.4 billion people. And this time, the world will not ignore it. This is the rise of Africa's $10 trillion alliance. This is the end of Western dominance as we know it. The world's next superpower isn't coming. It's already here. And its name is Africa. Across the world, the balance of power is shifting. For more than a century, the global economy was ruled from the West, from Washington, London, and Paris. But today, something historic is unfolding. A $10 trillion alliance rising from the global South, and its heartbeat is Africa. This isn't just another trade deal. It's a movement, a revolution that's shaking the very foundations of Western control. For decades, Africa was treated as the world's raw material supplier. Gold, oil, cobalt, lithium, shipped out cheap, processed abroad, and sold back at 10 times the price. But those days are ending. From Cairo to Cape Town, a new alliance is forming, one that's uniting 1.4 billion Africans under a single economic vision. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is already the largest trade zone on Earth by population. But now, it's expanding beyond trade. It's connecting infrastructure, currency systems, and energy grids, linking 55 nations into one unstoppable economic engine. Add in BRICS, the world's most powerful emerging bloc, now joined by Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Africa, and Africa's position transforms overnight. Together, this network controls over $10 trillion in GDP and the majority of the world's critical minerals. The same resources that power the phones, cars, and computers in America and Europe now sit in the hands of nations that no longer answer to them. And that's why the West is panicking. Because this isn't just economic growth, it's economic independence. In Kenya, digital payments through M-Pesa and Pan-African banks are bypassing the US dollar entirely. In Nigeria, local oil refineries built by African billionaires like Aliko Dangote are ending decades of dependence on foreign imports. In Zimbabwe, new gold-backed digital tokens are stabilizing the currency and creating Africa's first real alternative to the IMF system. In Egypt and Ethiopia, BRICS membership opens billions in trade lines outside the dollar system. And in South Africa, lithium, cobalt, and nickel are no longer being sold as raw exports. They are being processed in-continent to feed Africa's own electric vehicle revolution. For the first time in modern history, Africa isn't waiting for permission. Western policymakers see the writing on the wall. The US dollar, once used in 90% of African trade, is rapidly losing ground to local currencies and digital settlements. France's hold through the CFA franc is collapsing as West African nations push for the ECO, a new regional currency. What's forming now is a southern financial firewall, a system that doesn't depend on Washington, Brussels, or the IMF. China and India are racing to build railways and ports across the continent, not for charity, but for partnership. The Lamu Port-South Sudan-Ethiopia transport corridor will link East Africa's interior to the Indian Ocean, unlocking billions in trade. The Lobito corridor in Angola will connect mineral-rich Zambia and DRC directly to Atlantic export routes. Each project strengthens Africa's internal trade and weakens Europe's colonial-era pipelines. In the capitals of the West, alarm bells are ringing. Because Africa's alliance isn't built on ideology. It's built on results. A continent once divided by colonial borders is now uniting around shared prosperity. The numbers tell the story. Africa's combined GDP could reach $29 trillion by 2050. Intra-African trade is projected to rise 52% in the next decade. And by 2035, more than half of the world's workforce growth will come from Africa. While Europe wrestles with recession and aging populations, Africa's median age is 19. Young, ambitious, digitally connected, the future labor, talent, and consumer base of the world. The implications are enormous. If Africa sells finished electric vehicle batteries instead of raw cobalt, it keeps 90% more value inside the continent. If it refines its own gold, it gains control over billions in capital flows. If it trades in its own currency, the dollar's dominance weakens. And that's exactly what's happening. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, is already live, allowing instant cross-border payments in local currencies. It means Nigerian naira can pay for goods in Ghanaian cedis without touching a single U.S. dollar. Quietly, efficiently, Africa is building its own SWIFT system. The world's financial center of gravity is moving south toward Nairobi, Lagos, and Johannesburg. In Washington, officials are calling emergency meetings. In Paris, policymakers are warning of a strategic collapse because they understand that once Africa's internal market matures, their leverage disappears. For the first time, the continent that fueled Western prosperity is reclaiming its wealth, its voice, and its destiny. And that's what this $10 trillion alliance truly represents. Freedom. Freedom from external debt traps. Freedom from currency manipulation. Freedom to trade, produce, and grow on its own terms. The global map of power is tilting. The old North-South divide is fading, replaced by a new axis, the Global South rising. From renewable energy in Morocco to digital finance in Kenya, from industrial corridors in Egypt to smart cities in Rwanda, Africa is leading innovation, not following it. And while Western media continues to paint Africa as unstable or risky, investors from Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America are already moving in, betting on the continent's future. Every port, every factory, every data center built adds momentum to a transformation no one can stop. This isn't the Africa of yesterday. This is the Africa of tomorrow, confident, united, unstoppable. So when people ask why the U.S. and Europe are in panic, it's simple. Because the monopoly is over. The tables have turned. A $10 trillion alliance has redrawn the map of power, and the world will never be the same again.